in looking at the ideal, what is the ideal, what should be the ideal, and so forth, and that goes all the way to the person's foundation, what they have for a foundation, and what a nation has for a foundation, what a society, what a group, what a fraternity, what a family, what a community has for their foundation. Because that's what they're going to be building on, and what they hold for ideals and where they start will tell you a lot about where they are in that process and how it's going to turn out and when it's going to turn out and so forth. Because these cycles can also be used for timing purposes, which is where we get the prediction and the predictions and the prophecies that come forth from these. We can look and we can know an ideal and perceive what the subject's ideal is and where it is in relationship possibly to other ideals that are going to be surrounding it and so forth. And if they're converging, as we mentioned, on a point, and how is that all going to work out? And so there's where you have, that's the create and the Oahs, that's a part of the create and the Oahs. And we know that from music, even though it may sound like noise to somebody else, it can sound like music. Well, I mean, there is a quote in Oahspe that, or I should say a passage in Oahspe, that talks about the goddesses who were older than the essentially any planet that's out there. They've been around long enough where they've seen planets get born, live, pass out of existence, so that when they're looking out, they've seen everything that was never there when they were, earlier in their life. So it's all brand new to them in that sense. And it says that that to them, these things that happen with corporea and everything like that, and the moving of the planets, it's all music, and to them, to their ears, and they're perceiving the soul, the harmony of the whole thing, because that's the beauty of love, wisdom, power, harmony, symmetry, music as well, is that true wisdom, wise dominion, is built upon love. It's not divorced from love. It's an affirmation of love, but more than an affirmation of love, it's an assistance for love to move forward. And because remember, the wisdom is more abstract than the love, which is more the subjective. And so you have wisdom, which is built upon love, while power, true power, and the most potent power, is not divorced from wisdom nor love. It's the same with harmony, symmetry, music. So symmetry, all symmetry, has harmony within it. You may have to look for it to find it, but it's there. Harmony underlies everything. It's the cosmos, it's the note of the cosmos, so to speak. Well, symmetry, then, is built upon harmony, and the more harmonious in a situation, the more harmonious an act of wisdom is, and an act of symmetry, because even though you have, you might decide, well, let's go do this, this, and this, and this, and that's going to have repercussions. That's the symmetry. That's going to cause all these things, waves, to happen. And those who are recipients of these waves, for them, that is symmetry happening, occurring to them, because that's impersonal to them. It's not, you're not directing it sort of at them per se, or interacting with them in that regard. And so the more harmonious symmetry is, so that you have an artist who can create something of beautiful symmetry, and it has harmony within it, you see. But if they're out of tune with the harmony of the group, then it may look atrocious. their act of symmetry. And so symmetry is built upon harmony, and then we look to see whether you can look to see whether it's being perceived, that harmony is being perceived or not. But also, and we look at music and the flow, well, what we call good music or musical has those elements in it. It has symmetry in it, and it has harmony. And so good music, a good flow has harmonies, and chords and beautiful stuff, and symmetries, the beat and the rhythm and so forth. So it has all that symmetry in it. The flow has all those things. The music does. And so when we look at number 6 and the 6th cycle, which is the Hoi, we take all those things into consideration. Ideally, we take all those things into consideration in order to understand how it's going to turn out in the end. If that's what our intention is as far as prophesying, it may be just to see what's coming up and then preparing for it. Well, you have 6. 6 is the ideal. You have the ideal in number 6, but 6, the Hoi itself drifts. Okay, and it's drifting. Well, for you looking there, it would drift this way. And boom, and what do you have there? Is you have what's called the extreme. It's Dru, D-R-U-H, in the Tablet of Samoyed, which is the 7th condition. And now it's a little bit awkward for me to go that way, so I'm going to rotate this way because I can do it better. And so there's your extremes. That's number 7. Okay, you start out with Hoi and you had the drift, went to the extremes. Now what happens if you go past the extremes? Well, it starts being upright again, only now it's... So in other words, this point here is the extreme from the upright. Okay, the 45 degrees. Yes, but it's a true cross at the 45 degrees. But now, what happens if you drift a little bit beyond that? Well, now that all depends. Because if you drift a little bit beyond that, if you're not one with Jehovah, it's a collapse. It causes a collapse. 7 is known, among other things, as limitations or limits. You can know where the limits are. But it's also understanding. It's perceiving something in clarity to a certain extent, depending upon the grade of a person who's doing the perceiving. In another sense, 7 is the fullness, represents the fullness of the ideal. Because you're starting off with the ideal and you're drifting. And you drift, and you drift, and you drift. And while that's going on, you're experiencing the ideal. And you take it to the extreme, to the fullness of that ideal. And then depending upon essentially how close one is to Jehovah, we have a collapse. We have a collapse once the drift continues on. And so, and this may seem, well, that's a bad thing, but no, it's actually a good thing. Because we need to slough off stuff that's no longer necessary. We need to perceive what works and what doesn't work. And so that's good. It's good. It can be bad or it can be good, depending upon how it's perceived. What we're dealing with the Dru then is limitation and also understanding. We gain understanding. You see, when you go through the drift and then you have the collapse, well, then you gain a lot. You understand a lot. Oh, well, I didn't know that was going to happen, or I didn't. Oh, hey, look at this beautiful stuff that happened. You know, because we did that. We took it to its fullness, and it was virtuous. It was the light instead of the dark. And yes, we could see how to rearrange it now. We understand how to do it better. 8 represents, after the collapse, the things that are left over, essentially, after you go past the extremes, and you lose that stuff that isn't essential, then you're left with the nub, with the quick, with the heart of what it is that we need to experience, that we need to grow with, that we need to continue rising up in toward, ideally. Well, so when you have a collapse, it can collapse into chaos. We know that. We've seen it enough times to know that. And this chaos is essentially, it collapses to what we would call a field, meaning a milieu, technically into a higher order. It actually went into a higher order. The framework went from this framework, collapsed into a larger, and now a larger framework is now in charge, and that's the field. And what we have for the symbol of Samoin is EOI. And in the middle of that field, that collapsed field, is a single leaf. And that leaf represents life. It represents organization. It represents the condensation, the crystallization, the bringing together into a unit, into a whole. It represents regeneration. From that, we're going to go forth again. And so that leaf of life, which is EOI, the creator of all, the sustainer of all, the I Am that is everywhere and present here and everywhere. The leaf of that life is always here. That's the beauty of the 8th cycle. It's always here. There's always an 8th cycle going on somewhere. We can always tune into it if we need to or would like to. In other words, we can always tune in to the ever-present Creator, to the all-perfect, to the all-whole, to the all-harmony that is contained within a impervious unity. 8 is equivalent, and using the force 1, 2, 3, 4 cosmos, it's the cosmos of the Ieo, of the upright, of the inner foundation. Because we started with the inner foundation and then we labored with it in the outer foundation, we got our ideal, we went and went forth in that ideal. Now it doesn't have to be a drift. You can actually go forth in your Hoi and take it to the extremes. But there's always the drift. I mean, even if you don't do that, it's always going to drift to the extremes in any event, which was the point, part of the point of what was being said. All that is to provide for man to understand that we have an inner foundation and an outer foundation, and we have to have our inner foundation integrated into a whole. And that whole is EOI. That whole is the creator of all, the all-person, the all-one, the all-singularity. That's EOI. The order and system within chaos, seeming chaos, that's EOI. That's the leaf of life. It's always there. It's always here. Right here, we can think of it right there in our heart. It's always here. The 8th cycle represents, among other things, regeneration. We went through these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, the limit, boom, the collapse, and now regeneration in the 8th cycle. EOI.